Season 3, Episode 12 of The Bad Batch continued on with some of the similarities to The Mandalorian Season 2, with the Bad Batch using a Juggernaut to get into an Imperial installation and get some information, in this case meaning Vice Admiral Rampart, that might help them with the recovery of their new charge, who was captured by the Imperials, hoping to use her for some experiments related to Project Necromancer. Not to mention their ship blowing up and getting some help from Fennec Shand in the process. But superficial similarities aside, I think this was a really fun episode. There was the main plot of the Bad Batch making that recovery mission, while the B plot involved Omega getting settled in on Mount Tantus, and we'll talk about both of these elements. Ultimately, the Bad Batch's mission was fairly straightforward. They got into the planet Erebus, which means they were essentially going to hell and back in order to find Omega, and they picked up the former Vice Admiral, who is being incredibly rude to his fellow inmates. I do have to question sending the other prisoners to run around in a field in order to distract the Empire. They can't really survive out there, so the Empire is definitely going to be picking them back up, and the Empire might not be incredibly pleasant about picking them back up. But the Batch is on a bit of a time crunch here. I also did really like the scene between Fee and Crosshair, with Fee talking about how Crosshair had explained his winning personality. It is too bad that we never really got any scenes between Tech and Crosshair, especially talking about Crosshair's new decisions, so having that kind of represented through Fee is a nice touch. I mean, it's definitely going to happen. Tech is totally alive, for sure. But on the note of unaccounted for clones, there is one extra little wrinkle to Rampart's involvement here that I think could come into play in the future. It was, after all, Rampart who told Crosshair that Cody had gone AWOL. Now, it's entirely possible that this is just true and we should just take it at face value that Cody did go AWOL. But my biggest problem with that is that if it were the case, it seems like Cody would likely have linked up with Rex at some point. After all, we're several months past that point in the timeline now. There's been plenty of time for Cody to make that connection. But if Rampart knew what was going on Tantus and had been responsible for also transporting Cody there to become part of the CX Clone Trooper project, then that might be something that Rampart is able to reveal more information about. We know this was an extra level of conditioning being done to existing clone troopers, and while it didn't work on Crosshair, it could have worked on Cody. Isolation and stripping these clones of their identity seems like a big part of what this program would have been doing, so it's not like Crosshair would have known if Cody was undergoing the same thing at the same time, especially if Cody underwent it earlier since he went missing before Crosshair decided he was done with the Empire. But that's our clone conspiracy session for the day. In Omega's section of the episode, we saw that she's back at Tantus, and she's mostly learning things that the audience has been learning over the course of the season. It may just seem like she's back where she started, and in a certain sense that's true, but the prior escape is what set Crosshair up for the position he's currently in, not just physically rejoining the Bad Batch, but taking the next steps on his actual road to redemption. And now Crosshair being with Hunter and Wrecker may just be the extra push that the Bad Batch needed to be able to actually find Mount Tantus. Omega's been pretty clear all season that she doesn't really consider her work at Mount Tantus to be done. She still wants the other clones held there to be free. This also means we get to see more develop in her relationship with Dr. Carr. Last week we already saw some trepidation in how Emery was dealing with the Force-sensitive children, and now with Omega there, a lot of that is just going to be reinforced. Omega's blood may be a binder that is key to them being able to replicate an M count, but Omega's also proven that if you want to have a nice smooth prison, then she is 100% not the key you want there. The other factor to this is that, while Omega doesn't have a high M count herself, I don't think this means that she is not going to turn out to be Force sensitive. The connection we've seen between Omega and other life I think is an important part in this, and that came out a lot when Ventress was testing her. We've already seen with Sabine that you can learn to touch the Force even if you don't have a particularly high M count, and I think one of the overall failures with what the Empire, especially Palpatine, is doing is reducing the Force to this kind of eugenicist scientific program that the Empire is experimenting on with M-counts. Now, of course, this doesn't mean Omega is definitely going to be Force sensitive, but I think the key point is that what the Empire is doing is a perversion of how you're supposed to interact with and view the Force, rather than just being objective experiments about how to access it. I still do have some questions about what exactly is meant by the inability to replicate the origin of a clone's M count. This seems to be most often interpreted as the clones can never have an M count at all, which is certainly a possibility, but there's also the possibility that what it means is the M count just doesn't match what the original had. So with Palpatine's interest in what the Empire's trying to do, they are trying to clone Force sensitives because they want more Force sensitives, whether Hemlock knows exactly why Palpatine's looking to do this or not. Under that possibility, then the M count of any given clone wouldn't be any different from what you'd expect to randomly get in any other birth in the galaxy. This would put midichlorians back in the court of being some sort of expression of the Force, rather than just saying that by default all clones have 0 midichlorians. So is what they're doing with Omega's blood going to allow them to inject an existing clone with midichlorians and then make them essentially match their origin? Or is the goal to use what they learn with Omega during the creation of a new clone, with new clones being able to match the M count of the original donor? That's it for this week's review as we head into the end game of the Bad Batch overall. Hope you're all enjoying the season. Thank you all for watching the review, and hope to see you next time.